What does 2011 have in store for the industry? John Loos, property strategist at F&B, is with me in studio to give us his views. John, thank you so much for joining me today. Oversupply, what are we looking at this point in time? We still have vacancy rates high in the single digits scenarios, which is much better than what we saw in 2009.
Yes, Eleni. Well, I don't think vacancy rates, if one looks at the Ruder figures, there hasn't been a noticeable decline in vacancy rates for office space according to SAPO or industrial space vacancy rates according to Ruder. But at best they've probably stabilized, whereas they were steadily going up in 2009. So that sector seems to have stabilized, and I guess you could talk about an oversupply. It's always debatable because there is a certain natural vacancy rate, but if one looks, Carsten and I, back to the high double-digit vacancy rates that one saw early last decade before the boom gathered steam, it's certainly not that sort of oversupply. So whereas the oversupply in commercial property seems better than a decade or so ago, residential by comparison seems to have been worse over the past couple of years than what it was a decade or so ago.
How does this scenario affect rental income growth?
Very weak at the moment. There was, if one can generalize, I'm sure there are nodes where it was different, but generally speaking, the major office nodes and industrial nodes went into year-on-year decline in rental inflation, some stage late 2009 last year. Starting to just emerge, in other words, stabilize, and some of the nodes coming out of deflation, but by and large, very weak rental growth at the moment still.
Are we going to see a turnaround in this regard, or do you think that only once we see a real turnaround in the vacancy rates, then we can, in fact, see an increase in rental income as well?
I think it's not too dissimilar from the residential market. As I said, I think the commercial sector is generally in healthier shape, but the sort of we did see something of a mini recovery, I guess you could say, last year, and cap rates started to recover a bit after decline or after rising the year before. But I think, you know, we're going to have to wait probably for a few years for a significantly better performance in commercial and industrial property. It's a weak economy, weak job creation, that would mean weak new business growth too, and therefore a weak take-up of new space. So I think for a couple of years it's going to be a mediocre performance. What is helping to stabilize the boat, if it may, in the commercial and industrial space is that we've had a massive drop in development of new space. So that does help to stabilize the vacancy rate somewhat, but as yet we're not really seeing a significant decline in the vacancy rates back to levels where rental inflation would take off again.
Let's take a step back and not only look at the industrial and office space, but also look at the retail space at this point. We are still seeing vacancies coming to the fore, but it really all depends on location. We've also seen a few of those retail shopping centres that perhaps were built in the wrong space and have come under the hammer as well. So we have seen a few of those scenarios playing out. Give us your trend that we might see into 2011. We've got rising electricity costs. We still have very high unemployment, as you alluded to as well.
Yes, I suspect that your recovery in retail sales last year and going into this year is a reasonably decent growth rate now, should bring about some sort of mini recovery in the retail market. But I talk about mini cycles these days, because I think the retail sector too overall will give relatively low returns for quite some years. Obviously, with shopping centres, location is probably more crucial than the other two categories, and what one tends to see in bad times is some of your very good regional shopping centres seem to make good returns even throughout these bad cycles. But overall, during the boom years, there was a big consumer boom, a lot of new development of shopping space, and a big oversupply was created a few years ago. It wasn't only about the boom and then the bust that followed. When you go into recession and consumer demand drops quite significantly, you do get this oversupply of space. But there's also been a structural change in retail. And by that I refer to the political change that's taken place in the 90s and townships becoming more acceptable places to do business. There's significant purchasing power in a lot of these townships, Soweto being a notable one, and the townships are starting to normalize into mixed use areas. That's almost a no-brainer. That would be the same as what the suburbs did in the 1970s. But that increased this competition between a lot of centres, because a lot of purchasing power from townships would typically go into the main CBDs or into some major former suburban nodes to shop. Now you've got competition between the two.
You were talking about the fact that we have seen supply of a lot of these, buildings of retail shopping centres, and also on the industrial front as well. Retail sales for December hitting 8.3% year on year, compared with a revised 8% in November. The expectations coming through on the retail sales front, again, economists didn't get it right. They didn't think it was going to be so strong. At what level would you like to see retail sales where we can comfortably say that we could see more supply of buildings coming onto the market?
At the moment, Eleni, probably going to put a spanner in the works by saying I don't want to see retail sales growth so strong, because I'm not sure
at
that
8.3%.
I'm not sure that it's sustainable, and we must be wary. Income growth in the household sector is weak. The economic growth rate is weak. And what's happening now is you're seeing the household savings rate starting to deteriorate again off an already very weak base, and a very high level of indebtedness of the household sector as well. So I'm not quite sure that we should read too much into this relatively strong retail sales recovery. I think that in 2011 you'll probably see some significant slowdown, and we are looking at an interest rate hiking cycle possibly late this year or early next year. So I don't think we should be lulled into any false sense of security. Household sector's finances are not in a good situation at the moment, and possibly won't be in a decent situation for a good few years. So if there is, I don't anticipate in the near term a massive building boom in retail space. Should that be in the pipeline, I would suspect that some are going to burn their fingers. I don't think this is sustainable.